Hello, everyone. My name is Tristan Robinson, and I will be the host of this 1 o'clock session. So, I am one of the female coaches here at Edmonton Scottish United Soccer Club, and I'm currently coaching an amazing group of 2012 girls. I grew up playing club soccer here in Edmonton and went on to play for Concordia, where I was encouraged by one of my coaches there to start down my own coaching journey. I'm really looking forward to hearing from our speaker today over the next 45 minutes. So with us now is Dr. Vicki Harber, who will be talking to us about a sense of belonging for girls and women, the secret sauce for quality sport. Vicki is Professor Emeritus at the University of Alberta from the Faculty of Kinesiology, Sport and Recreation. Currently, she consults with Canada's Sport for Life team to help advance physical literacy and long-term athlete development, while improving the quality of sport across Canada. Experiences from 2 Olympic teams with Rowing Canada, researching the female athlete as an academic, coaching a girls' soccer team, and being a parent fuel her passion for this work. Vicki knows that much more than content knowledge is needed to bring quality sport to life in our country. It is essential to work collaboratively and build relationships grounded in trust and humility at all levels of leadership. Her greatest joy comes from working with those who are willing to examine the way things are done and not afraid to do the right thing for the right reason. Take it away, Dr. Harber. I'm really excited to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Tristan. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here today. Huge shout out to Jeff Paulus for that phone call a little while ago. Just this venue that's he's unfolded for all of us today is amazing. I've been listening to the speakers this morning, and it just warms my heart that such an initiative is happening, and a huge accolades to Scottish United for staging this. And so again, thank you again for inviting me to be part of your day and symposium. So I gotta say that there's been some fascinating topics brought up already this morning. I'm not sure how many of you have been following the earlier speakers. So hearing from Carly and Leanne about the Rise Up program and talking about the importance of experiences and the environment that our women are involved in, moving into Dr. Vinecourt's pieces around implicit biases and the kinds of thoughts and emotions we hold, some that we're aware of and some that we're not. Amy's piece, it's just so much information. So my background actually academically is much more in the physiology and more into endocrinology and hormones. And so it was because of my research focus on girls and women in sport that some of the outcomes and consequences of hard training and so on started to unfold, that it was impossible to examine a girl or a woman in sport without looking at other aspects in her life. So what are those social circumstances that we've been hearing so much about? What are some of those psychological spheres that she's a part of? And so as an academic, and thanks to my colleagues at University of Alberta, they allowed me into their space and become a bit of a co-learner along the way. So the first few slides that I've got for you really kind of tell you some of the backstory around this approach towards girls and women in sport. And I am not, as others on this call or in this audience likely, a soccer expert by any stretch of the imagination. But I do know girls and women in sport, and it's with that I'll proceed now. So this first slide, this was based on the work that I'd been doing in girls and women in sport, came up with a workshop and a practical approach to work with either coaches or sport administrators, understanding what do we need to know about girls and women to provide appropriate experiences and create suitable environments for them to thrive and flourish, and trying to create language that was friendly. And as an academic, we know that academics can geek out and speak in a language that is that can alienate and distance people as opposed to trying to get people to understand and be more friendly with the language. So coming up with these 3 areas that I coined around the frame of injuries. And injuries was a metaphor that we know injuries are a bad thing. And my goodness, if we know how to prevent them, we are going to do everything within our power to avoid them. And the very first presentation this morning was about ACL, non-impact ACL injuries. And that, again, is one that comes to mind very clearly for our girls and women. And just before I go on, I also want to say that even though we're shining a light on girls and women today, that the vast majority of what we do with any participant in sport is going to be the same. And yet there are those unique features that girls and women present that will allow us, whether it's as coaches, supporters, as parents, to again create those most suitable experiences and environments for our youngsters and across the lifespan. So the mechanical injuries, in particular around knees, I talked about. The second one here is around energetic injuries, which has to do with food intake and energy expenditure. We're not going to go in there. But then this third one, the psychosocial injuries, which in the early days I called injuries of the heart. And this really got me diving into the literature around understanding what is talking about the dropout rates. And the more I started to explore in this area around suitable environments and the role of psychosocial attributes in helping girls feel that they belong within sport and how to help them, I started thinking, I don't know that girls actually drop out. I started saying, I think girls are pushed out. I think they're in an environment that just doesn't work for them. And so they don't feel like they're there. And it might be discreet, it might be overt, but I feel they get pushed out. And it reveals itself within dropout rates. So that was something that I worked with our Canadian Women in Sport, which back then was called CAUSE. And from that, emerged a wonderful opportunity I had working with Respect in Sport, co-funded with Jumpstart, Coaching Association, and Canadian Women in Sport to create a module, an online module that took the scaffolding of these injuries and put it into an online module. And so this was a wonderful excursion to get this information out into the heads and hearts of all of those people who were working with girls in sport. And we all know that the vast majority of our sport system is run off the gracious volunteerism of loving mums and dads and parents and guardians. And so the credentials or training and competencies are not uniformly present. And so we want to be able to create opportunities to equip our coaches, to equip our administrators without it becoming an excess burden on their time. So these were some background features that got my feet wet in what's called the real world. It's all well and fine when we've got the evidence and the research. And yet, unless we can make it real in the hands for those people who are working with our girls in the clubs and in the regions, then it's really not good enough. And that's something that I've learned over the last decade working with Sport for Life, working with a number of our national sport organizations around getting it real. And so that has been a huge privilege. And again, enormous learning opportunities for me. So let's now dive into, I'm going to try and narrow this down into one single area and giving you again this background. And it's always a wee bit awkward, as I'm sure in the time of COVID, we're staring at all of these faces on screen and I'm thinking, I haven't got a read of anybody who's listening to this. And we're usually always looking for faces of affirmation or I have no idea what you're talking about. But anyway, let's give it a go. And Tristan's in a great spot. So Tristan, if anybody, feels like, hey, what's going on here? I know they're going to reach out to you, and please don't hesitate to float those comments or questions in. So this was something presented to me from a body of research out of the US some time ago, and it was a point of clarity. And so it was about understanding, well, what are some of those unique differences between girls and boys? And so I'm going to start first of all with boys. What do we understand? And so if you can imagine that you are in a play space or on a pitch, and you've got a whole vast amount of equipment available off on the sideline or on the side of a gym wall, and you've got a group of young boys coming in, and they will come into that space, and they will instantly be intrigued by all of the equipment there, and they are going to show you what they've got right away. So this idea about effort is that they will instantly become present in front of you. That effort that they provide is going to lead to a particular level of performance, whether it's low, medium, or high. And that then falls out into an acceptance piece within their group, within their tribe that they are playing their particular sport with. And so they will come in, and those of you that have had the opportunity to coach both boys and girls, sometimes hear from coaches or physical education instructors, educators, that they will say, my goodness, with groups of boys, I can't even get the instructions out. They're already over there. They're grabbing the balls, they're grabbing the sticks and so on. Can't keep them down. And so this idea that this sequence of they're ready to go right from the beginning. When we look at the girls' point of view, we'll see that what appears first here is acceptance. And so she will enter that space, and first and foremost, her spidey senses or radar is going to be asking, do I belong here? Do I fit in? Do I feel welcome? Are my contributions being valued? And for those of us that can get that right, oh my goodness, her effort will blossom right in front of you. And then that will lead to a performance of low, medium, and high. So this was a real light bulb moment for me many years ago. And sometimes when we think of that, when we are working with girls and women in one scenario, or boys and men in another, or sometimes in a mixed group, having this in mind is often helpful about what we need to attend to around what is the environment that we are responsible for creating for our participants. Now, again, this isn't black and white. We know that all research, there's always going to be differences between individual people, but this is a general finding. So from that, then, what I'm going to be targeting right now, and this is, again, one little thread out of this big tapestry, which other speakers this morning have alluded to. There are so many different pieces to this puzzle, but I really wanted to grab onto this piece around sense of belonging. And again, in a preferred environment, if I had individuals in front of me, I think we can see this, sense of belonging. And what I would like to ask people just to consider to yourself, what does sense of belonging look like? If you were an observer in one of your colleagues' coaching scenarios and you were watching this, would you be able to come in and observe a sense of belonging? And that can sometimes be tricky to answer, but if I flip that question over, and what does a sense of belonging not look like, then all of a sudden, I think a lot of questions start to come forward. Is that when we think about the flip side, how do we make people feel like they do not belong here? And as harsh as that sounds, I think that becomes an important discussion point, that we reveal some of those understandings as we go forward. And there is a huge amount, a growing body of literature around this idea about sense of belonging, and the building of social emotional learning skills among and between our participants, all of which also is very important for our coaches who are the leaders of these sessions. No one is exempt from this. And these social emotional learning skills, things like self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, these are emerging competencies that we're starting to understand more and more about being the underpinnings of human development and can allow us as individuals to be able to navigate life, not just in sport, but in all of those other areas of life that we find ourselves, whether it's in school, whether it's within our career, whether it's in our own families. So these become incredibly important. Now, a funny kind of story that has emerged, kind of coming back in from my Sport for Life experience, where we have these athlete development frameworks. And I believe it was Dr. Vinecourt who said this morning is that one of the issues is that with our youngsters in sport, we have such an emphasis not only on the winning, but the technique and tactics that emerge. And I see those as linked, because with the pressure to win, my goodness, we've got to get the X's and O's down. We've got to teach kids how to find space and use value time and so on. And so there's the emphasis on technique and tactics. We also very easily get glammed and blinded by the physicality of our individual participants. So the kids that grow up sooner, the early matures, we go, oh man, yeah, that person's got to be on our team because they're going to knock the tar out of the opponents, and there we go. And so we get glammed by those two pieces, and the other parts of athlete development, and which have huge implications for their performance over time, are the psychological or mental skills, as well as what we at Sport for Life called life skills, which is a lot of packaging around the social emotional learning skills. Well, when presenting this to our national sport organizations and some of the provincial territorial sport orgs, they would say, hey, we don't do that stuff around the life skills. That's for the home, that might be for schools. And yet when we spoke with national sport organizations to ask them, when their athletes reach the pinnacle of performance, world-class performance, when their wheels fall off and the performance runs amok and doesn't go according to plan, 9 times out of 10, the things that have failed the athlete or failed the experience come out of that social emotional learning. So that the athlete has made a series of poor decisions, that their relationship skills have been crusty and poor in getting along with others or with new teammates, not being able to adapt to a new coach or a new environment. So we knew we were onto something here, and we were not going to let that go. So my focus for the rest of this time here with us is really to tackle this sense of belonging. And here I am, and this is, but again, I repeat, just one small piece around what can we do to be deliberate and intentional around creating a sense of belonging. It's been talked earlier this morning around a sense of climate or culture within a club. It extends beyond the individual team. It's very important to have it under the entire club or organization's umbrella. So what are some of the examples? Well, first and foremost, how do you meet and greet your athletes on a daily basis? And this has worked marvelously well within education settings as well. Some athletes might want to do the high five, fist pump, elbow tap, do a little jig or dance with one another, all kinds of other things. And the athlete gets to self-select how they want to greet the coach under those circumstances. And these, again, are becoming part of could I say the ritual of when we gather. We want to be sure that when the young athlete arrives, we see you, we know you are here, we are glad that you are here. Second one is that before you get beginning, have you identified a collective purpose of what the current training session is all about? Have you checked in with, does everybody understand what we're up to today? And what does it look like? And you can do this as well, including those social and mental skills around, you can be deliberate saying, today's session is going to be a lot about helping others. And can you provide support when needed? Do you see it when others need support? Can you provide it? So that's another example. And then before you leave, this idea of an optimistic closure. What are the takeaways from the day and the session? And a bit of a self-report. So you get the young athlete, and this can be done at the youngest of youngest ages, saying, how do you think you did today around, what we were trying to achieve? Do you think you were able to support others? Or what kind of got in your way around supporting others? And this then, when you create that environment of permission and you help the athletes develop their own vocabulary, that again, it's not just about tactics and technique. It's also important that we see each other and that we respect each other and that we can identify our teammates when you are in need of help or when you need something different. So again, concrete takeaway points. Some of you, I'm sure some of you are already doing a lot of these very good things, but these, when they become regular, your young participants, and my goodness, even your adult participants are going to learn to look for those. So now a bit of a drift, because I think, it's not a drift, it's related, is that many times we're inundated with, you got to do this, you got to do that, and so on. And yet, from an impact point of view, how do we know we're making a hill of beans difference? What is impact? Do we have the desired effect that we want? If we're really aiming for sense of belonging, how do we know? How do you measure sense of belonging? You can't put a thermometer in somebody and expect to measure sense of belonging, whether it's high or low. And so there's 3 things that have emerged. And again, this is a collection not only from the research and science, not just from sport, but also from business and so on. And some takeaways from my work with national sport organizations. And there are 3 things that in my work with sport is saying, how do you know what you're doing is working? Is it moving your sport in a better place? And this then comes to measuring impact. Well, the first thing has to do with, what are your numbers? When we talk about recruitment, are your numbers being maintained over time? Are they dropping? Are they increasing? And tucked within recruitment are 2 components around awareness. How do people that don't know about your club get to know about your club within your own community? Do you have a campaign for that? And then if they do become aware, what are their first experiences with you like? Is that first experience compelling enough, exciting enough that they go, wow, I'm coming back here. I want more of that. And then we've got the regular, we move from recruitment into retention, which is going to be next up. And I am pulling this out separately because the strategies used to get people to get intrigued by your sport, intrigued by your club, are very different than what it means to keep them coming back. Retention, or how do you retain them? And then when we start thinking about retention, I want you to broaden your horizons around thinking retention. Well, retention in what? Well, if we're really being honest, around what we're aspiring for with girls and women in sport. I understand this is a soccer themed event, but really, if we keep girls in a sport that works for them, that's good too. And not to feel too frosted if they leave soccer to go and participate in another sport. So again, this is what building the numbers. And how do you know? So do you know how many register for their first time? Do you have a good idea of retention? Who's coming back? And do you have things like exit surveys or feedback opportunities from your participants, from families, about what makes it a good place to come back to? What are some of the knots and and things that might need tweaking to that why people say, I can't continue to do this. So the idea of retention is not only as an active participant and athlete, but what I've heard lots about, particularly with this leadership theme, is around, are you giving these young girls and women experiences in other roles that are part of a soccer community? Do you give them experiences with coaching? Do you give them experiences with officiating? Do you give them experiences as being a volunteer? And these then become an exposure to a broader community where it becomes not just connected with being an athlete, where you feel like, well, my only worth is when I'm wearing the jersey and I'm playing on the pitch. And when those days are behind me, I'm turfed. I'm culled from the herd and I've lost my sense to stay in belonging. And that's a huge piece that if we can understand the broader service that sport can provide for girls and women along the way, that is huge. The third part of this is progress. Can you document that you progress these individuals? Not only the technical skill acquisition. Do you know that when athletes are progressing from a lower level of technical, tactical skills to higher levels, that's usually pretty easy. Physical skills, yeah, we slap the strength and conditioning on them. We can put a stopwatch on it. We can put a tape measure on it. We can measure the pounds that they can lift. We can measure that. But how are you going to monitor or put a surveillance on their mental skill progression, on their social emotional learning progression? Well, we've now got some wonderful that allows us to start looking at that in a much more measurable kind of way. And I'm not trying to burden individuals nor burden clubs with that. But what ends up happening is that we end up practicing all of these different strategies and program little tweaks and twists. And can we collectively get an understanding? Is it making a difference? Does it have impact? And these three areas around recruitment, retention, and progression become critical points that at a club level, everybody can have a discussion about how that might unfold. So my second to last slide is a bit of a wrap up. And again, I've only done this very quickly around sense of belonging. And when we start talking about collecting numbers about recruitment and retention and progression, a phrase that I often use with sports, instead of saying, well, let's collect the data. Sometimes as soon as I say that word data, I see the eyes glass over and I feel, no way, I'm not going to do that. And so then I've started to develop a language around what's the story you want to tell about your club? What's the story that Scottish United wants to tell about their work with girls and women? And then all of a sudden we think, well, what's the story we would like to tell 1 year from now after this particular symposium? And so if it was around sense of belonging, not only what story does Scottish United want to tell, but what story would you like your members to be telling others? Wouldn't it be a thing of beauty that all participants have such a wonderful sense of belonging in this particular space that they want to bring a buddy? In fact, you create an opportunity where you get to bring a buddy to have that shared experience. As every speaker has remarked, the importance of social connection for girls and women is pinnacle. And that does not soften the demand that you can put on them to become warriors in their sport. And yet now it's about creating a balance for that. And when it comes to then the second part of this is about measuring impact. The numbers that we talked about around recruitment, retention, and progression, they can help shape your story. They actually become a bit of the backbone of your story. If you can talk about recruitment, saying that last year, X number of new individuals joined the club. Well, what's the story 1 year later? Does it appear on your website? Can you use your website as a social presence for telling this story. So there's all different kinds of ways in which this can be woven. My second last slide, this is something again where the Aspen Institute out of the US and Project Play have gathered together, and they've created this marvelous coaching resource called Calls for Coaches, Coaching Social and Emotional Skills in Youth Sports. And there's the URL for it at the bottom if any of you would like to have a gander at that. And it gives some very neat and tidy, ready to use ideas, some of which I've already introduced to you around how you greet your athletes. Do you let them all know about what we're here for today? That optimistic closure, and a very, very good list of different things that one can try, and sort of what's the possible influence of that on your young athletes. So I am done, Tristan, and so I hope I've been well behaved around timing for everybody and to allow for questions. So I am happy to listen to any questions or comments. I'm always open for stories as well. If I realize you got to type into an email, but that's it for my side, Tristan. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Vicki, this was so amazing and just really resonated with my experience as a female player growing up and what I've seen over the last 10 years of coaching young female athletes. And what really stuck out to me is your point about sense of belonging. Mental health and this idea of identity are so closely linked. And if we as coaches can kind of give kids a grounding and a foundation, just in terms of coming to practice and making them feel like they belong, then I think we're all doing a pretty good job. So thank you so much. We do have our first question, and I know you had posted that link for Calls for Coaches around the strategies and stuff like that. But is there one that you've seen that stuck out or that you would suggest to coaches that we can start to use right now to change the practice and helping to keep girls in sport?
Yeah, and I will, because I knew we were always going to be tight for time. And so I made a risky decision to land on something that actually works for me and not, again, I use exactly what I put up. I don't know, are the slides still showing to the group, Tristan? So if I go back here.
Sorry, I don't think they are.
Oh, they aren't. I'm just gonna repeat them then. And so I use those welcoming activities. And so the idea of greeting your participants. And so how do you do that? And it's not just for some of them. This is important, that you have to be committed, that you are recognizing each and every participant. And as a caveat to that, we know that girls and women love to chat with each other. And some coaches will say, this drives me crazy. Look, we're starting practice here at 7:00 and here they are, and I got to intrude on that. And so what I've offered up as a suggestion and has worked is saying, look, tell your athletes that you know that this is important time for them. So to come a little bit early. So while they're getting their kit on, get all that conversation out. But at 7:00, it's time to go. And so there might be, some that are just sliding into practice right on time. Well, they may have to catch up at a water break or at the end. But by the coach speaking to it directly, the coach is saying, I understand this is important to you. They're not getting irritated by going, come on, we got to get over it. When the group gets started, to be very clear about what is the purpose or intention of today's workout, of today's training session, and keep it simple. And it's not to say there might not be other things to it, but what is one thing you want each and every contributor to feel that they are going to be looking at? And one that was a practice session with coaches when they had their their athletes with them was that example of, can athletes recognize when one of their teammates needs help? And many times, for instance, when we talk about athletes self-selecting their own groups, small groups to work in, what do you think typically happens, Tristan?
They pick their friends.
Yeah, you can pick your friends. Sometimes those that are more skilled are going to migrate to those that are more skilled.
Yeah.
Well, you can create alternatives for that, especially when there is the idea that we are a team and we have committed purpose around helping each other as well. And that does not happen by accident. That needs an executed, created environment by the coach. And then at the time when you're closing out, reflect back on what has happened. And the coach can give all kinds of insights. But what if you speak to a couple of players saying, what do you think? What did you see happen? How well did you do? Did you have any experiences where you had a chance to support? Because when athletes know that they are going to be recognized or rewarded for those kinds of things, dollars to donuts, they are going to go, wow, the coach values this, so I'm going to start doing this. Those are kinds of things, Tristan, that can be done instantly, as long as they are done with what I call the right intention and done with regularity.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great example. And you see, because there's so many of those TikTok videos going around, right, of teachers with their different greetings to kids, and how like the joy on these kids' faces of every single one having their own personalized greeting with the teacher.
Yes.
Is obviously so impactful. And
Yeah.
what I realized as a coach was I didn't think that young girls wanted to chat with me so much. And so after practice, I would say, okay, bye. And we have our soccer dome, and I would start to leave, and they were all like a mother with their head, like little chicks that were just like walking with me. And so I was like, oh, I need to create intentional time after practice to talk to them, because they want to talk about practice. They want to tell me about their dog. They really crave that. So I built that into my not rushing out of practice or staying behind. The girls really valued that one-on-one time with their coach. So no, yes. That's great.
Yeah.
Another question we have coming in is, how do you help young athletes overcome difficult situations in sport? So something like losing a final, missing that penalty shot that I know I still have some memories of the ones that I've missed. And is there a risk to an individual if the social connectivity has not been met? So I think there's two questions there. Yeah.
Yeah, and that I'm going to lean on a bit, Tristan. What you just alluded to is when you get a chance to have non-soccer related conversations with your athletes, with your team, then you get to know them as an integrated person. And that again is a piece that I think not only is missing from the girls and women's side of things, with a lot of the mental health strife that our young and our highest performing athletes are suffering from, is because they've become a commodity. These young athletes have become as valuable as well as they can execute a penalty kick. Or for that goalkeeper, I'm thinking about some of Annie's stories earlier today, is as well as you've been able to stop shots. And part of that is, by no mistake, this is now where our entire sports system has become a single-minded focus on winning, which Dr. Vinecourt mentioned very clearly this morning about this over-focus on winning at the expense of who we are. And as coaches or as clubs or as provincial organizations, we cannot hide from that. If we can become quite hypocritical by saying, oh, don't worry about it. But if our fists are clenched and we go, oh, it's all right, then we become fraudulent with it. So this is where coaches really need to have such a, what I call a moment of mirror evaluation, to say that is it really that important to me that I control the outcome of this game? Because it does start from the coach. Because if you have a warm-hearted, welcoming coach, then that young athlete might still feel badly that the task wasn't accomplished the way they want. And yet that coach will be allowed to put it into perspective, knowing other parts of this athlete's life are also meaningful to her. That if there's one athlete who is having a particularly hard time, do the rest of her teammates help support her in that moment of feeling grief? So these become lessons of learning, and it's not all pretty in the beginning. But I would say with a lot of the reactions of our athletes, that the coaches need to, would help them to be able to look at their own social emotional competencies, because those then become directly reflected and impact their athletes. And that was just, it was a stunning study about, it was in the education setting, but if a teacher was super, super stressed in front of her class, and if the teacher was really worried about provincial standardized tests and how the class was going to do, these kids, when measured, their stress levels, their cortisol levels were through the roof. They were coming in like on pins and needles, as opposed to another class of exact same grade level within the exact same school, where the teacher's approach was much more calm. So who we are as coaches and leaders and instructors in front of our youngsters matters to a huge degree.
I think you've given me my own aha moment, because I wear my emotions on my sleeve as a coach, and probably, in some game situations, do not keep my cool for my athletes. So I appreciate that. That's my mirror moment.
Oh, yeah. And Tristan, that's perfectly fine, because coaches want to continue learning too. So if you find that you've flipped your lid at a certain moment, own that with them later, saying, oh man, I'm still feeling, and say, you know what, next time I'm going to think about this a little bit more. So there's no shame in that, because I think, again, you get a chance to model things not going so well, and what will you do differently next time? That's a perfect opportunity to do that.
That's great. I think we only have a couple of minutes left, so we have time for one more question. And it's about your performance indicators. So you talked about recruitment and retention as some things that we can measure. While attraction and retention are great, how do we build programming and culture that we can measure tangibly? Is there a way, is there studies that you know about that we could start to look at as a club, or other clubs who are watching can do?
Yes, and this again is where it becomes very important from a club initiative. So if I'm thinking about, and this is something that way back in, I feel like it was the dark ages when I was coaching at another Edmonton club here, trying to establish some standards at the club level. So it wasn't just shouldered by one individual team. So the idea of, do these indicators matter at the club level? And so there's very few clubs that I will say, does it matter that your membership numbers drop? And most of them will go, well, yeah. So from a collective point of view, having the club manage those numbers takes the weight off the shoulders of an individual coach who is working with an individual team. From a retention point of view, and I'm going to tuck in progression with this at the same time, is that, are there standards of progression that one is expecting to see with athletes who are progressing through the ranks of participant as an athlete, for young coaches? And these then, they don't need to, again, be individually created by a team, but we've got so much information right now that there are well-established standards, again, whether they are technical standards, physical standards, and again, thing of beauty, these things around mental skills and social emotional learning. What are the expected attributes to help athletes identify with these, to take responsibility for their own progress? And then does a club provide opportunities? I heard earlier that giving all athletes a chance to be a coach. And maybe you do that within the confines of a team to begin with, but can you get the slightly older age group coming in to do part of a practice session with a slightly younger age group? These then start to create real life, tangible examples where you're creating the environment that has some integrity to it. You're not just saying the words of sense of belonging, your actions are meeting those as well. So some of those indicators, and then the last thing I'll say to that, Tristan, is if the club values these kinds of things, then club-related coach meetings are essential, that you need to get feedback from coaches. And as soon as I say that, I was working with a club in British Columbia. And again, you can probably predict what some of the kickback would be, is saying, no, that's the time of my practice. I can't get there. And so I said to the club, which wasn't met with a lot of happiness either, saying, why don't you create a sequestered time at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning where the fields are not open for practice? And this is how important the club thinks gathering coaches are, is that you create an open window. Well, again, some people weren't happy about that, but if we really don't value these things, we won't put them in our schedules and won't make them feel valuable. Athlete meetings are another idea. So again, those are, I understand, within the Rise Up through Zoom and so on. But again, the idea of drop-ins. So those would be a few examples, Tristan.
Dr. Harber, this has been really, I feel like you and I have just had a one-on-one conversation, because that you're the only one I can see, but this was really, really valuable information. And I hope everyone out who has been watching really took some stuff away that they can start implementing with their programs, regardless of gender, sex, anything like that. I think you gave us a lot of good information. So I just want to thank you for your time and sharing this with us. This has been really helpful. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And enjoy the rest of the afternoon with the event. Thank you, Tristan.
Yes, thanks.
Bye-bye.